Hi, I'm Mr. Elon, and this is the first in a series of mini lectures for the purpose of review or absence with the technical use of the camera and composition packet. So you should have your packet, and if you turn to the very back page, with this, we're going to be looking at set 1, which is simplicity and emphasis, using primarily auto modes. It's worth noting that your camera may have an auto mode, and that auto mode may do everything for you. So you might actually want to switch it to program. Program is probably the letter P. Program sounds scary. It sounds like you're programming the camera, but it actually is just like auto mode, except it gives you a little more freedom to do things like switch it over to macro, tell it whether or not you want it to use the flash. A lot of the times, especially with more recent cameras, it'll just force you to use it if it thinks it needs it, and it's not always right. We'll start, and you can look at some of the same images or some similar images on pages 2 and 3 in your packet. We're going to start, and we're going to look at this Kodak guidelines for better photographic composition. A lot of these images are in your packet. So we're looking at simplicity and emphasis as photographic principles. If we look at this photograph right here, it's asking a really good question. Is this a picture of a telephone, or is it about this bridge that we're on, or is it about this cactus, or is it this thing or this? There's too much going on here. The photographer, in order for this photograph to feel intentional, the photographer has to be a little more clear about what it's supposed to be about. So in this case, just saying, oh, really, the cactus is kind of what I had in mind. Notice how much better the photo works when he or she does that. Now, achieving simplicity, first of all, you don't want to go too far. Part of simplicity and emphasis is emphasis. Therefore, making sure it's clear what the photograph is about. And just this quick Google image search of emphasis in photography yields a whole lot of images where there are a lot of different and really interesting ways that emphasis is being established. Sometimes it's through color, like right here. Sometimes it's through size. Sometimes it has to do with like leading lines, like this right here, which also kind of combines color. Sometimes there is like some degree of like radial balance, or other ways of leading the eye toward what the viewer wants them to see. And there are other psychological factors, like the fact that not only do all these lines lead toward this, but this is a human eye. If you imagine this kind of situation in nature, I'm walking through the woods and here's an eye peeking out at me, I'm instantly going to want to look at it because I'm a human being. In terms of simplicity and emphasis, it's not about making your photo boring. It's about making it clear what it's meant to be a picture of, and the deeper you get into this, the more it's about making sure that's happening in a dynamic way. But we have to start somewhere, so here we have this bird, and in the left photo, there really isn't anything that jumps out as being misaligned. It's not like here's a bird and here's a parking lot that has nothing to do with the bird. We have this bird perched on this thing, and we have naturey looking stuff in the background, but the background is so contrasty that it's hard to even look at the bird. So sometimes getting your picture to seem a little simpler and more emphasized is just a simple matter of rotating, pivoting side to side around the subject. Other times it has to do with framing it better, just getting closer to the thing that you're looking at. Here we have this interesting looking sort of like Spanish style church, and then we see this like parking lot. Now you'll always have people who want to try to explain their way out of a mistake, especially in art. You're going to have someone taking a picture like this and saying, oh no, I meant for that to happen. I meant for those cars to be there. It's meant to show that there are people who are going to church, that the church is active. Well, there's only 2 cars here, so I'm not impressed. So just go right ahead and trespass, climb up onto here, especially if it's a church. They're probably not going to be too unfriendly, and get the picture that you really want. Now, a very common mistake people make, depending on what kind of device they're using, between a phone and a camera, is forgetting that you can turn it. you're going to find that most people who are taking pictures exclusively with their phone, most of their images are going to be vertical because that's how people are used to holding a phone. And most people taking images with like a standalone camera, because the design of most standalone cameras is horizontal. You're going to have horizontal images, and people forget that they can turn it. So in the case of this picture, we have a portrait of these 1970s friends or couple or whatever, and we have like just some kind of extra gunk over here. Simplicity is about reducing, minimizing, or eliminating distractions. And as you'll hear me say again and again, in photography, what you choose to not show is often as important as what you choose to show. In this case, if this picture is just cropped down to just them, or if in the first place, especially if we're dealing with resolution in digital photography, if in the first place the photographer had simply just turned the camera and gotten a little closer, they would have a higher quality image. So sometimes it's about pivoting in a variety of different ways. It's not always just side to side. Sometimes it's top to bottom. There are also visual effects that can happen where you're maybe blurring the background to get the busy background out of the way. Or sometimes it's as simple as just like you're taking a picture in your bedroom and you tidy up. You get things out of the way. It's important to know that photography is not just capturing the authentic. In fact, oftentimes things can feel more authentic, intentional, and communicative if you take more control. In other words, you fake it. So, in terms of, that pretty much covers simplicity and emphasis. In terms of what you're going to be doing with auto mode, or in general with this set, you're going to be taking 4 pictures. The composition with this set is pretty easy. You're going for simple subjects, avoiding background distractions, and making sure it's clear what the picture is supposed to be of. Anything you can do to make the picture feel emphasized and interesting rather than just like a boring picture of an object is highly encouraged, but that's not like something that you need to worry too much about yet. So basically, as you complete this section, you're going to have 4 photos, 1, 2, 3, and 4. When you complete them, you have me initial on your checklist. And remember, if you don't get my initials, if I tell you one or more of your photos is wrong, it doesn't mean you lose points, it just means you retake them. Sometimes you may even, throughout this process, refer back to these videos and let that remind you what you're supposed to be going for. With the first 2 pictures, you are taking a picture with the flash on of a simple subject, and then you are taking a picture of that same subject with the flash off. And this is a spoiler, but the point of this is, in most cases, you are going to find, especially if it's lit properly in the first place, that the flash is not your friend. There are professionals that use the flash effectively. There are reasons to use the flash. And there are different kinds of flashes. For instance, there is such thing as a remote flash that you put like off to the side, and it fires light that's going to tend to look a lot more natural. But the fact is, flash can create some problems. Flash can wash people out. You see how like this lady barely even has a nose anymore. Because the flash in whatever auto mode the camera is using is metering really weird for the situation where you are getting a decent range in the background, but these people right up front are just getting killed by it. The flash can also kind of flatten things by creating awkward shadows. So here we have a horse, but because the flash is blasting straight back from just above the camera lens, which is essentially the camera's eye, it's kind of like looking at the world while wearing a miner's headlamp. So we have these harsh shadows here that are kind of making it almost seem like the floor and the wall are flat, because they cast equally onto the floor and wall because they're coming directly from our point of view. Sometimes those shadows can be extra awkward. This is actually a photo from my middle school yearbook of the basketball team. And if you at a quick glance, you might notice that it looks kind of like they have mullets. That's happening because it's a black and white photo and because of the way the contrast is working, but also because the hair seems to just be continuing on, which it's actually just the hard flash shadow. So, the flash is not your friend. Avoid it when you can. The third shot, you're going to take a picture in macro mode, and macro photography is close-up photography. So you're probably either using a camera that has macro built in, a camera that requires a separate macro lens, which you may or may not have, in which case just see me. I may have something that you can use. Or I will have something you can use. Or you might be using a phone and you can use a clip lens. There are these pretty inexpensive. You can buy one or borrow one from me. But there are these lenses you can clip onto your phone. It's essentially a glorified magnifying glass, but it allows you to take macro shots with your phone. Because macro has to be optical, it has to be capable of focusing close up. It's not something you can just like fake digitally, essentially. So when you take a macro shot, you're just going for super close up and a texture. And in most cases, you're going to find that when you're that close to something, it's going to kind of create simplicity and emphasis in and of itself. Especially when macro has a tendency, much like if you put your finger right in front of your face and stare at it and focus on it, everything beyond your finger becomes a blur. Macro has a tendency to do that too, which means any distracting brushiness in this ladybug photo just melts away into a blur, which again is another way to create simplicity and emphasis. You're sort of minimizing background distractions. That could have worked better in this bird photo if this stuff back here was significantly blurry. It would still have some contrast to it, but the more it blurs away, the less it's going to feel contrasty. Finally, you are going to take a zoom shot, and the important thing with your zoom shot is that it is a faraway subject, a subject that you cannot get closer to anyway. So there are kind of two reasons for that. First is simply, let's say you're on vacation somewhere beautiful and you're looking at a waterfall, but they put guardrails up for safety or otherwise. You're not going to be able to zoom in on, or I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to get closer to it. So in that circumstance, you have to zoom in on it. But you might have been in this situation before and found that as you're zooming, the thing you're zooming in on, it seems like you're shaking. And you're almost wondering sometimes, what's wrong with me? Why am I shaking so much? So in the case of zoom, you want to make sure that, sorry, I lost my windows here. In case of zoom, you want to make sure that the only time you're using it is when you have to use it, because that shake can sometimes really foul things up, and it essentially means you have less control over it. And when the lens is essentially lengthened to zoom, every little shake you do at your hand gets exponentially multiplied as the focal point is further and further away from you. Finally, the difference between digital and optical zoom. Optical zoom is when the lens actually moves, and that is better. It's ideal. You're still going to shake consistently. But if your camera has optical zoom, you're going to have a better time, and you're going to have photos turn out better. When it's digital zoom, which most phones are, you've probably found in the past that you zoom in on something and take a picture of it with your phone, and you might as well have just taken the picture without zooming and then zoomed it with your fingers after, because the image essentially looks the same. So digital zoom is just taking all of the pixels and multiplying them to zoom. Optical is actually getting the lens to sort of not exactly get closer, but magnify. So it's happening with the light as opposed to happening with the pixels. So optical is preferred, but in either case, you don't want to have to zoom, but especially if it's digital. Once again, once you've gotten those 4 images, there is the other notes column that will remind you of some of the things I've gone over. It's very shorthandy, but the information is there. You can also review pages 2 and 3 in your packet, and of course review this video. Once you've gotten your 4 pictures, you can get it checked off for me and then move on to set 2. Good luck.